Hi guys, welcome back. So we just reached 10,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel. That is just amazing. Thank you so much to everyone who subscribed, who has followed my work, who has watched my work. Thank you so much. It really does mean a lot to me. So to celebrate that, I decided to finally share the fourth and final part of my own self-harm story. I have postponed and procrastinated sharing this part of my story, even though I did share it on God is Grey a few years back now, but I have avoided talking about that on this channel specifically because it's quite a painful part of my story that I don't really want to have to think about, but also mainly because I know this could potentially be quite controversial. Because today I'm gonna share how my evangelical church, and more specifically my church youth group, try to treat my mental illness. So this is not in chronological order. Just because it's part 4 doesn't mean it's what happened after part 3 when I was in hospital. It's actually what happened between part 1 and 2, I guess you could say, between the time in 2012 when I was 14 and started self-harming to the time my parents found out about a year later. But first, of course, a couple disclaimers. If you want to skip the disclaimers because they bother you, please go into the description. There's gonna be time codes where you can skip them, but I cannot possibly talk about such a topic and not make a few disclaimers first. My first disclaimer is that I know those were very kind people that had no intentions of ever hurting me. I know they offered me their support in the best way they could in one of the most vulnerable times of my life. And I know some of them may be watching today. Most of them have actually apologized after the fact for what they done and the damage they caused. So this video is really not to shame them, to throw them under the bus for making their best at the time with the tools they had. I really have no hurt feeling about them, so if any of them are watching today, this is not to shame you or anything like that, it's just to share a part of my story, so hopefully it doesn't happen to other people. My second disclaimer is that I don't want to be insensitive to anyone's beliefs or story. I know that for a lot of people, faith, spirituality, religion is a huge part of their recovery and of their mental health. And that's completely fine. Not everyone has a bad experience with the church and how they deal with mental health. For a lot of people, the church is actually really helpful, and that's okay. We can all have different experiences. And of course, not every Christian has the same belief as another Christian. Not every evangelical has the same beliefs as people did in my church. That's completely fine. We can have a variety of different experiences and beliefs. Again, I'm just here to share part of my story and what happened to me, so hopefully it doesn't happen again to other people. So let's get into it. So if you haven't watched my other videos, I'm just gonna very briefly recap my story. I started self-harming, like I said, in 2012 when I was 14. My parents found out around a year later at the end of 2013, and then around 2 months later I was sent to hospital. So like I said, what I'm gonna share today is what happened between 2012 to 2013, when I was between 14 and 15. So my background with the evangelical church is that I had been going to church my whole life with my family. We had been going to the same church in my town, or rather the town where my parents lived, and that was just part of my life. We went to church on Sunday mornings, I was going to Sunday school, I was meeting friends, and those were people that I knew well. And this is where I eventually, when I was around 14 or 13 maybe, started to go to the youth group. So the youth group would meet on Friday nights, and it was basically like a Sunday service but for youth, and most of them were pretty young. I wasn't the youngest, but not many of them were older than 20, I guess. Even in the leaders, I don't think any of them were older than maybe 25, or maybe just 2 of them were. So it was a very young group that was led by young people for young people. At first I loved going there, I really did. I loved the community, I loved the singing, I loved the dancing, I loved meeting with friends every week. It was really a great time. And this gave me a sense of community that I didn't really have anywhere else. When things became a bit more complicated, I guess, is when I turned 14 and I started experiencing mental health issues. So again, if you want to know more about why I started self-harming, how I started self-harming, and what was happening at that time, I will leave this video in the iCards. You can go watch it for more details. But around that time, I was in the church youth group. I was going actively, I was going every week, I was very involved, and I loved going there. This was my main support system. And I'm not sure if they were the first, but they were in the first people to know when I started self-harming. It's so stressful talking about all that. Oh my god. Like I said, these were people that I really liked, that I felt comfortable with, that I knew were older than me, that could potentially help me. So I told them pretty quickly. And I don't think any of them had had any training in handling anything like that. Like I said, we were all pretty young and we didn't really know what we were doing. They were older than me, but still quite young too. And they weren't really any adult, like older adults in their 30s, 40s, supervising the group, and no one really had any training in mental health. So like I said, quite quickly I told them that I thought I needed help and that I was self-harming and that I was experiencing suicidal thoughts. All of them were concerned, they were very empathetic, and they tried to help me the best they could. So of course they prayed for me, this is the main thing that they did. They prayed for me, they prayed with me, but none of them were professionals and none of them told me to go get professional help, none of them got me professional help, and none of them told my parents, even though I was underage. I was between 14 and 15. To be clear, I asked them not to tell my parents because I didn't want them to know, because what teenager wants their parent to know that they're self-harming? Most of us are very, very afraid to tell our parents, even though we shouldn't be. Anyway, that's another topic. But they knew my parents very well. Some of them were working with my parents because my parents were very involved in the church. They were employed by the church and they would work with my parents and not tell them anything. So instead of getting professional help and professional counseling and medication like I did after, I was told to pray. And I was prayed with, and I was told that basically this was a spiritual issue rather than a medical, psychological issue. And so it was treated as such, and it was treated with prayer, it was treated with Bible reading, and not with secular professional help. And so this went on for around 3 to 6 months, I'd say, something like that, until we got to the ski camp. Between right after Christmas and New Year, we would have an annual ski camp with all the youth groups. So during the day, we would go skiing, we would go play games, we would go shopping and all of that. And at night, we had a service every night. We had a worship time and then we had a teaching. And it was pretty routine, at least back then. I don't know if it's still the case today, but it was pretty routine back then to have one night that was called Deliverance Night, where exorcism would be performed. So what exactly was an exorcism like? So first off, it wasn't called an exorcism, it was called a deliverance, but the principle was still the same, that you had demons or spirits inside of you that had to get out, and you would get them out by prayer. I was thinking of including some footage here of what it looked like, but I'm not gonna do that because it can be quite intense to watch and I don't want to trigger anyone. But if you want, you can find plenty of footage online, although most of them are pretty graphic and out there, and it was less theatrical than what you can see on the internet if you look at Bob Larson or anything like that. But it was still quite intense. So basically you had the person that was getting the deliverance or exorcism done, and you had usually multiple people praying for them at the same time, usually 2, 3, 4 people praying for them in quite a hardcore style, I guess you could say, with loud music in the background and a lot of crying, not really much screaming, but usually a lot of crying, and it was quite an intense experience. So at that first ski camp when I was 14 is where I got my first deliverance / exorcism. I'm actually not sure anymore because it was quite a long time ago if I had gotten multiple in that first ski camp. I think I did. I think I got maybe 2 or 3, but there's at least one that I'm 100% sure I got. And I just want to be very clear that this was voluntary. This is something that I actually asked for because I thought this would help me. This is not something that was pushed on me. This is not something I was pressured into. This is something I actively sought myself. And like I said, it was pretty routine to witness them. It's something that was pretty routinely done. It's something that is very different between the evangelical church and the Catholic church. From what I know, in the Catholic Church, it is something that is very regulated. Not everyone can perform an exorcism. You have to have a permission first from someone higher up from you. But in the Evangelical Church, basically anyone that feels comfortable doing one could do one, and that's what was happening. So I got my first deliverance / exorcism session, and I remember feeling a bit better. I mainly remember feeling exhausted because, like I said, it was quite intense emotionally, but I could tell quite quickly that this was not gonna be enough and that was not gonna work. So I quite quickly went back and said, hey, I don't think this worked, what's going on? So this is why I say I think I got a second one the day after, but I'm not entirely sure. But to me, there's two main issues, at least from what I experienced, that come from this idea and this practice of exorcism. First is, how do those demons get inside you? From the evangelical side that I witnessed, it's from things that you do, it's from the music you listen to, it's from the sexual experiences that you have, it's from people you associate with, the sports that you do, it's from things that you do that aren't deemed as godly. So it can quite quickly lead to a cult mentality of only listening to Christian music, only watching Christian films, only having Christian friends, and that's what happened to me. I became very, very centered around the church and around my faith, and quite cult-like, I guess you could say. The second issue is that when it doesn't work, when you feel like it doesn't work, like it happened to me, you're basically told that it's your fault because you're not ready for the demons to leave and you don't want them to leave. And it then feeds into a cycle of victim shaming and victim blaming, and basically being told that your mental health issues are your fault, that it's your fault if you're suicidal because you first listened to metal music or something like that, and then you didn't want to let the demons go away. And if you're already experiencing something like mental health issues, like self-harm, like depression, you're already feeling quite bad about yourself and you're already in a pretty vulnerable state. So getting told by adults that you value and you value the opinion of, that it's basically your fault if you're not getting any better, is quite traumatic. So like I said, I got my first session done in that winter, in that ski camp. Then a whole year passed of basically saying the same thing. No more exorcism, I guess, in that time, but I was still getting worse and worse. Being told to pray, not given any help, and then second ski camp rolls around. At that point, my parents had just found out, but still let me go to ski camp. And then same thing happened again, and I got a new exorcism done. It basically went the same way, lots of intense praying, lots of crying from my part, very exhausted afterwards, and not doing much better afterwards because less than a month later I was in hospital. So basically I had a whole year where instead of getting better, I got way worse. So what happened afterwards? What is my relationship with the church and faith now? What effect did this have on me? So like I said, and like I shared in part 3 of my story video here, is that I then got admitted for 6 weeks in a mental health hospital where I couldn't go to youth group anymore. And this is basically when I cut ties with most of my church. From that point on, I basically stopped going to church because it was way too much for me and it had not been helpful, and I had to cut ties with the church for my own mental health. My parents were very supportive of that. They understood why I was doing it. This was never an issue with my parents. And today, 7 years later, I don't go to church anymore. I consider myself an atheist. And of course, I don't think that my bad experience with the church is the only reason why I'm an atheist today. There's a lot of other reasons too. But I think I would be lying to myself if I said that it has nothing to do with it. First, because it's why I stopped going to church in the first place, but also because obviously this was a significant experience in my life. Like I said, except stopping going to church afterwards, the main impact it had is that I spent a year getting worse instead of getting better. So that's gonna be it for today. I think this is one of the hardest video I've ever had to film, but I'm really glad I did because this is an important part of my story. And I hope this never happens to anyone else. If you want to chat with me, you can hit me up on Instagram, link is in the description. As always, I answer to every DM I get, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye guys.